Hello, my name is Hossein and in this tutorial video we're going to make this Yahoo logo motion. It is a little bit long because it is full of tips and we want to teach you everything in 2 sessions. So stay with me until the end of the video. Well, to start, create a new project and then create a new composition with the size of 600 and 600 and the frame rate of 30 frames per second. You can also set the animation time in the duration section. The entire animation is supposed to last 6 seconds, so I leave it at 30 seconds. The background color is not very important, and I click OK. First, we need a background to create. Our background color should be blue. We can use a solid for the background color. From the Layer menu, New, select the solid option. I leave its size at 600 and 600. Change the name of the solid to background. Choose a color from the color field. Of course, we can also use the dropper tool to select the exact background color. I choose this color for now, and we can change the color later. Now we need to import the Yahoo logo into the program. I downloaded this logo from the internet in the AI format, which is the Illustrator standard format. I import it into the program by drag and drop. Here it asks you how you want to import it into the program. I select footage and merge layer and click OK. I drag this logo and drop it in the layer section. We must choose this color for our background. But before that, make the logo a little smaller by pressing S on the keyboard. For example, I set the scale to 70%. We can use the logo color for the background. I select the background layer and select the solid settings option from the layer menu. In the color section, click on the dropper and select this color for the background. Now the color of the logo layer is the same as the background, so we have to change it to white. Search for the fill effect from the effects and preset panel and drag and drop it on the logo layer. Choose white. Now we have the original Yahoo logo theme. We want to animate the circle first so that it moves from the bottom to the top. Its color should be blue at first, and after hitting the ground, its color will turn white. Also, the background should be white at first. In order to access this point, we need to convert this layer to shape. To do this, right-click on the layer, and from the Create section, select Create Shapes from the Vector Layer option. With this, a new layer will be created, and the lower layer will be automatically hidden. If I open the content part of the upper layer, each letter is placed separately in separate groups. Hold Ctrl and click on this circle to select it. Press Ctrl X to cut. I need to create a new layer. From the Layer menu, select Shape Layer option. Press Ctrl V on the created layer to paste. Our circle is pasted here. Set the anchor point in the middle, and I move it with the selection tool and place it here. I will make it white so that it can be seen. Unhide the vector layer to see the original circle. The reason this circle is bigger than that is because we scaled the bottom layer a bit, but the scale of upper layer is 100%. I set the scale to 70% so that their size is the same. Then I move it and place it on the bottom circle. Well, to animate the circle, we have to place it in the middle of the page. We can use the Align panel. I will place it in the middle, then at the bottom of the page. Below the text of Yahoo, I draw a line using the ruler tool. Press Ctrl R to make the ruler appear, and in this way I put a line under the letter. Now we have to animate this ball. I put the anchor point in the middle. Create a keyframe for the position. Hit P and create a keyframe. And take it outside of the scene. I want this ball to move from the bottom to the top in 10 frames. Press Ctrl Shift and right. Zoom the timeline a bit and move it up from the y-axis. Till here, for example. Move CTI 10 frames forward. The ball hits the middle of the screen. It hits here. I hide these layers temporarily. After it hits the ground, the ball changes its direction and moves in this way, and hits here under the letter A and moves in this direction and finally settles in this place. In this direction, I move them 10 frames by 10 frames. I'll go 10 frames forward and put it here. I'll go ahead 10 frames and leave it here. I move another 10 frames and place it in the middle of the screen. If you look closely at the movement of the ball, you will see that it moves linearly. We have to curve it. We can use the Convert Vertex tool. Once we click on this point, these handles will appear, and by moving them, you can determine the direction of the ball, like this. Choose the Selection tool again. I go forward 10 frames and place this ball here. I'll go forward another 10 frames and bring it here. I'll hit Ctrl Shift and right and go forward another 10 frames and place the ball here. I go forward another 10 frames and put the ball in its place. Now how can we know the exact location of this ball? I will unhide this vector layer so that we know its exact location. I will move the circle, and after it is in place, I will hide this layer again. Now we have to modify this path of this ball and turn these lines into curves. We can do this with the Convert Vertex tool. I click once, these handles appear, and when I click again, these handles are disappear, and in this way modify the movement of the ball. I click once more and adjust the curves in this way. Try to adjust these curves in such a way that there is no broken state. Here again, if I click, this curve will appear and I can modify it. Drag it down to make the ball's movement smoother. Move the left curve so that the curve is in the straight line. Now if I play the animation from the beginning, hit space. We have made such an animation so far, which is certainly not very interesting, and we need to work on it more. The speed of the ball is also very low. We can adjust the speed of these keyframes. I want the ball to stop for a bit when it reaches the top and then move down. You can do this with the Motion Tree plugin. This is a paid plugin that you can purchase and install it on After Effects. I move the middle handle and adjust the speed like this. We can also make this keyframe easy ease with F9. Also this keyframe. We can ignore the intermediate keyframes to move faster. For this, we have to select all these keyframes, right-click on one of them, and hit Rove Across Time. This changes the shape of the keyframes. The speed of the ball is a little low. We can make it faster. I select these keyframes and holding Alt, move it to the left to reduce the distance between the keyframes. I will play the animation once more. I can normalize this keyframe by holding Ctrl and clicking. Again, the speed of the ball is slow. You can increase the speed of the ball by selecting keyframes and dragging the keyframes to the left by holding Alt. Play the animation several times until you get the desired result. Repeat this process. I select these keyframes and increase the speed with Alt. So far, I'm satisfied with the movement of the ball. Now we have to animate the letters. I want the letter A, H, and O to be in the middle when the ball hits the ground. They move up. Also, when the ball hits the ground, the background color should also change. At first, the background color is white, and the color of the ball is blue. And when the ball hits the ground, the color of the ball becomes white, and the color of the background becomes blue. So I change the color of the ball to blue. I create new solid and name it white background. And I choose white from the color section. Drag this background and drop it on the top of the blue background. Where the ball hits the ground, we have to change the background color. For this, we can use a mask. Select the blue background layer. Select the ellipse tool. Move the city eye and draw a mask like this where the ball hits the ground. Place this layer above the white background layer. Open the mask of the layer and keyframe the mask expansion section. Move 10 frames forward and I want the background color to change from white to blue in 10 frames. I increase the amount of mask expansion, like this. Select these two keyframes and make them easy ease with F9. Around this frame, the color of the ball should change to white. Select the ball layer. From now, we can change the name for the layers so we don't get confused. I can use this fill effect to change the color of the ball. I search it from the Effects and Presets panel and place it on the ball layer. Hit Ctrl right to move forward one frame. Hit U to see the keyframes. I want to change the color of this frame to white. I can move the second keyframe to the left to make this color change happen faster. For this keyframe, for mask expansion, I have to choose a negative number so that it will be hidden at first, then the color will change. Well, so far the animation of the ball has been completed. I want the letters to move up after this ball hits the ground. The letters A, H, and O should be separated and placed in the separate layer. Open the contents. If I hide any of these groups, you can see its layer. In order to place them in separate layers, we need to copy this layer several times. How many letters do we have? We have 6 letters, therefore we must copy this layer 5 times and delete the extra letters in each layer. With Ctrl D, we copy this layer 5 times. So for example, in this layer, I will keep the letter Y and delete the rest of the letters. Hit the delete button. I changed the name of this layer to Y. Now open this layer. I keep the letter A and select the rest of the letters with Ctrl and press delete. I also changed the name of this layer to A. I do this for the rest of the layers as well. I keep H and delete the rest of the letters. I will also change its name to H. Well, now all these letters are placed in separate layers. Press Ctrl A and then U to close all these layers. Now we have to move them. Press F2 to deselect all layers. Choose layer A. Set its anchor point in the middle. And using the Align panel, I put it in the middle of the page. I do this for layer H and O as well. I hide the rest of the layers temporarily because I have nothing to do with them right now. When the ball hits the ground, these letters are a little below this line and move upwards as the ball hits the ground. With the down key, I move this letter to the bottom of the line. I do exactly the same for these 2 letters, H and O. The letter H must be rotated 180 degrees to be placed on A. For all 3 layers, we need a position keyframe. I select all 3 layers with Ctrl and create a position with Alt-Shift-P. Move the CTI forward a few frames. Here I move the letter A up from the y-axis. Here, for example, I have to rotate H a little. Hit Shift S. No, sorry, I made a mistake. Hit Shift R to add rotation and enter -180. Move the CTI and here move the H upwards. I do the same for the letter O. In this way, when the ball hits the ground, these letters are thrown into the air. I will move the letter H a little and adjust it with the letter A so that it lands on this letter. A few frames later, I bring this letter down and put it on the ruler. The letter H hits A, so I bring it down. I will move it a little to the right. To move more precisely, we can use the arrow keys on the keyboard. I will bring it a little lower. This is where the ball hits the letter A, and they change the direction a bit. The letter O also hits the letter H, like this. It goes a little to the right. All this happens in a few frames. You see? If you feel that this is happening quickly, you can increase the time. Now I feel the speed is good. We can select all these keyframes and make them easy ease with F9. Well, we can stretch these letters a little when they move up. For this, click on the stopwatch of the scale. Keyframe the first frame as well. In this frame, I stretch the letter H a little. Remove the chain between X and Y and make it smaller in X and make it bigger in Y. Once here, it should return to its original shape. We can copy the first keyframe and paste it here. You can do this for the letters A and O as well. In general, the more time you spend on animation, the more beautiful the result will be. Where the ball hits the letter A, the letter H should be on the top of A. So I move the keyframes a bit. Here, when the ball hits the letter A, it must move forward. So this frame, I create a keyframe. And a few frames later, I move the letter A, and I have to put it in its place. Unhide this layer, and I put the letter A exactly in its place. When the letter A moves to the left, the letter H should rotate slightly, because there's nothing under it. So I select layer H and move it up a few frames ahead. And it should rotate. This is how I rotate it. Of course, I didn't create a keyframe for rotation, so I hit Ctrl Z and create a keyframe for rotation. When it got here, it should rotate. After a few frames, it should come to the ground and be in place. Now we need to fix the timing of the animation. Here it hasn't hit the letter A yet, it rotates, which is wrong. This should happen after hitting A. I'll select the middle keyframes and move it a little to the left. Also these keyframes. Now the animation timing is fixed. As soon as A moves to the left, H also rotates. We have to do the same for O. When O hits H and H moves up, O also moves up. So I move O a little up. After a few frames, it returns to its place. Unhide this layer, and I put O exactly in its place. Move it with the arrow keys. We have made this animation so far, but we are still far from the ideal stage. First, we animate them and set their timing, and then we will add details. For example, where O moves up, we can change the type of speed, like this. We can do the same for layer H. When it gets here, it stays in air for a while, then hits the ground. If you pay attention to this ball, it has a simple shape. We want to give it a protracted effect. For this, we can use the Motion Tree plugin. I select the ball layer and select the warp effect from this part. This is how this effect is applied. Now if you look closely, our ball has been removed and replaced by a tail. In order not to remove the ball, we must duplicate this ball layer and delete its effect. Hit Ctrl D. And for the ball layer, I remove this warp effect. It just got fixed. The ball moves and has a tail. But the tail is not set correctly. I select the tail layer and adjust it as desired in the effect control section. For example, I reduce the echo time. I set it to 2. You can adjust the choke section as you like. For example, like this. You can adjust the amount of chalk as desired. You can even reduce the echo time. Now I will duplicate again from this layer. You can make the echo time a little bigger. For example, 2. 2 is too much. I enter 1, 5. Now the line is smaller. We can reduce the chalk and create a tail like this. Again, I duplicate this layer with Ctrl D and increase its echo time. For example, I enter 2. I also reduce the chalk a little. Now we were able to make a tail-like shape. The higher the speed, the bigger these tails are. Well, we made the animation so far. Now it's time to implement a series of animation rules on these letters. For example, here, when A is thrown upwards, it must accelerate. We can use a scale to create acceleration mode. Press Shift S and create a scale keyframe. I move this keyframe. Now we have to stretch the letter A. We want the letter A to be smaller on the x-axis and stretch on the y-axis. This law is called squash and stretch in animation. Every number you subtract from x, you must add the same amount to y. I type -10 to subtract the x value. I add 10 numbers to the y-axis. Now this is a bit of a stretch. In this way it goes up, and when it is about to hit the ground, it becomes normal that we can copy from this keyframe. Here, when the ball hits the letter A, its shape must be changed, which I will explain. When H hits the ground, we need to animate the squash. Here I create a keyframe. I go back one frame and create another keyframe. In the frame that hits the ground, I need to add 20 to X and subtract 20 from Y. Of course, before that, we need to move the anchor point to create a squash from the ground. If I move its anchor point, the animation is messed up. You see? Press Ctrl Z. In order not to mess the animation, I connect it to the null object. Select the layer H and select the null tool from the motion tree plugin. And I put the anchor point of the null object at the bottom. And we animate this null layer. It is better to name each layer. I changed the name of this layer to null H. Press S. In this frame, I create a keyframe for scale. I go to the next frame where the letter H hits the ground. I remove the chain between X and Y. Add 20 numbers to X and subtract 20 numbers from Y. Because the volume is constant, it is only divided between X and Y. This is one of the rules of animation. Like this. When it reaches this frame, the letter H will go into the air again. So I keyframe its Y position. I move it up. When it goes up, the scale numbers are reversed. That is, X becomes 80 and Y becomes 120. Like this. You see? When it hits the ground, a squash happens, and when it goes up, a stretch happens. This is one of the rules of animation. I mean squash and stretch. It hits the ground again. I can copy and paste this frame. This scale returns to normal. So I set the scale to 100. After this letter H hits the ground again, it shouldn't stop and should have a bounce. For this, we can use the motion tree plugin again. I click on the last keyframe of the scale and use the Excite option. Wait a moment. Its setting appears in the Effect Control section. For this bounce to work properly, the last keyframe must be normal and not easy in or easy out. In the Properties section of the Effects Control window, you can change its parameters. If you feel that bounce is too long, increase the friction. And reduce overshoot. Now its bounce has decreased. I set the friction to 50 and play the animation again. I like the previous setup better. I set it to 40 and 20. You can do this for the letter O too. I will place its anchor point below. I will check the animation so that if it's messed up, we can fix it. As you can see, the animation is very good. Here we can also animate the squash. Hit S to appear the scale and click on the stopwatch to create a keyframe. One frame before that, I create another keyframe. Here, because it hits the letter H, a squash is happening. We can add 10 numbers to X and subtract 10 numbers from Y. A few frames later, we have to make it normal. Of course, here we had to add 10 numbers to X-axis, and we added 20 numbers. I reduce it and set it to 80. Here, when the letter is about to hit the ground, it should stretch. In this frame, for example, I subtract 10 frames from X and add 10 to Y. Here, squash happens, and when it gets close to the ground, it gets stretched. When it hits the ground, a squash happens again. I move the numbers. This will make your animation more interesting. After hitting the ground, the letter O goes back into the air. So I move it up from the Y section in position. Here the letter O shouldn't be squashed before it hits the ground. So I copy this keyframe and paste it here. After a few frames, it returns to the ground. But this time it will be normal. I set the scale to 70 and 70. When it hits the ground again, it shouldn't stop. You can use the Excite option of the Motion Tree plugin. Select the last keyframe of the scale and give it Excite. In this way, I create a bounce mode. Here, when the ball hits A, it should be slightly deformed. For this, we can use an effect called Mesh Warp. For this, I select layer A and search Mesh Warp from this part. I put it on layer A using drag and drop. With this, a series of lines will appear. We need to keyframe the distortion mesh option. We must create the keyframe exactly in the frame where the ball hits the letter A. Press U to see the keyframes. One frame before that, I also make a keyframe to have the original. And in the next frame, I will deform the letter A in this way. With this, the letter A accelerates. I also move the front parts slightly to the left. When it reaches this frame, we can copy the keyframes and paste it here. This frame can also be slightly deformed, like this. It depends on your art and creativity how to make your animation more attractive. After this, the letter A returns to its original state. If I play the animation from the beginning, you will see that we were able to make such an animation. So here, when the letters O hits the ground and comes up, the second O should appear and moves up. So I unhide the O2 layer and want to animate it. Exactly the frame where the other O goes into the air, I want this O to be appear. Press P for position and create a keyframe. Hit Shift S and create a keyframe for scale. I bring it down from the Y-axis. And I give it a little stretch. I subtract 10 from X. Of course, before doing this, be sure to move its anchor point and place it at the bottom of the layer. I subtract 10 from the X. And add 10 to the Y. Like this. A few frames later, I bring it up. At this point, an exclamation mark appears from the right and hits the letter O, which we need to animate step by step and then adjust its timing. We shouldn't see the letter O2 in this frame, so I use opacity. Press Shift T and create a keyframe. I will create a keyframe for the next frame and set the opacity of the first keyframe to 0. This is how it appears from the below. Now we can select these two keyframes and make them easy ease. Now we need to animate the exclamation mark and hide it. You have to move its anchor point. I want to put it on this point. Press Y and move this anchor point. Well, to bend this letter, we can use the CC Bandit effect. I search for this effect from this panel, and I put it on this letter by drag and drop. This will make the letter disappear, and two dots will appear here. These are the starting and ending points of bending that we must move and place exactly above and below the letter. In order for these points not to move and letter not to disappear during the animation, we must use an expression for start and end. Hold Alt and click on the stopwatch of start and end to open the expression section. And I type the expression toComp value. Copy this expression and paste the same command for end. Press Enter on the number pad. Now these points have been moved. We have to move them again. When you do that, when we bend it, it doesn't disappear inside. In the CC Bended section, I keyframe the bend option. I want this keyframe to bend a little. Like this. Now we can also move it a bit. Press Alt-Shift-P to add position keyframe. Click U to see only these keyframes. I keep this keyframe. A few frames earlier, I create another keyframe. I move it forward. And in this keyframe, I move it a little bit. I also remove this extra keyframe. I want this letter to appear in this frame. We can use Shift-T to add opacity. I want the frame before it to have 0 opacity and appears in one frame. In this frame, this letter bends again and hits the letter O. And finally, it returns to its original state, where the bend is 0. This is how it appears from here and hits this letter O. Of course, I don't like its animate. We will have a better animation with rotation. So I click on the position stopwatch to delete its keyframes and use rotation instead. I hit Shift R and create a keyframe. And in this frame, I rotate it a little bit. Because its anchor point is on the point, it rotates like this. So we were able to animate it in this way. Here the exclamation point hits the letter O, and then we have to animate the letter O. I select these keyframes and make them easy ease with F9. Of course, we want to bounce the last keyframe. We make it normal by holding Ctrl and clicking, and I give it the excite effect, like this. I think its bounce is high and we can change it. I set friction to 60 and overshoot to 10. Now the bounce is good. Now it's time to animate the letter O. First of all, I will correct its timing. I want the hitting to happen as soon as it reaches the top, because the movement of each letter affects the other. I move this keyframe. When it reaches the top, the exclamation point hits the letter O. After hitting the letter O, it should be slightly deformed. We can use the mesh warp effect again. I search it and place it on the O2 layer. Keyframe the distortion mesh option. One frame before that, I create another keyframe. This frame, because it hits the letter O, this should be deformed a little. Create your desired shape like in the video. It depends on your creativity. The more you work on the animation, the more interesting it becomes. So far we have created this animation. At the same time that the exclamation mark hits O, the letter Y also appears on the left side and hits A. Then A hits H hits O, and O hits the second O. We have to animate these letters like a chain. So we have to animate the Y layer. Unhide it. Open the content section, and there is a group here. I have to get a duplicate from this group. because I want to divide Y into two parts. Press Ctrl D on this group. Open the Path section and delete the extra parts with the Delete Vertex tool. I will remove these 2 points to separate this part. In the second group, I keep this part and remove these points. Now we have 2 groups. If I unhide it, you will see that this part is separate and this part is also separate. Why did I separate this part? Because I want to move it below this layer and give it a bend like an exclamation point. We can move its anchor point. In this way, I will place its anchor point here. I choose the selection tool. Now I open the transform part of the group and keyframe the position. And I keyframe the rotation and rotate it a little. Oops, I chose the wrong group. I have to choose the upper group, group 8. In the transform section, I keyframe the position and rotation. I moved the CTI a few frames ago. I rotate it like this. And I move it. I will rotate it a little more. You can see that the letter Y appears like this. Now we have to give the letter Y the CC Bandit effect. When the rest of the letters hits the ground, the letter Y should also appear. For example, when it got here, it must hit. I move these keyframes forward a little. I copy the first keyframe and paste them here. Now I need to give this layer the CC Bandit effect. I search it from this part and place it on the Y layer. I move these points. And in order for it not to be empty during the animation, we must give it expression to its start and end, and give that toComp value expression. I copy this expression and paste it for end. Move these points if they change. We have nothing to do with the start and end, and I will create a keyframe for bend. Now I have to create a rotation keyframe. Hit U to see just the keyframes. Hit R and create a rotation keyframe. Hit U again to see the keyframes. We work with bend and rotation. I want rotation and bend to happen together. I move this keyframe. Here I create another keyframe. And in the first keyframe, I bend it. I also rotate it a little. In this way, the letter Y hits A. I will bend it a little here. And after a few frames, I set its bend to 0. And when it becomes normal, this Y appears. Again, we can give an exact effect to the bend keyframe to have a bounce. Now it bounces too much. We must increase its friction. I changed the settings in the properties section. For example, I set friction to 60 and overshoot to 10. Overshoot 20 was better in my opinion. Now we have to animate the letter A and it will be deformed by collision. I select the distortion mesh of layer A and create a keyframe where the collision happens. Of course, the collision of Y with A happens very soon, and we have to move its keyframes. I select these keyframes and move them a little further, because H hasn't reached the ground yet. I want this collision to happen when H hits the ground. I will move these keyframes a little more. I think it's good here. Here the hitting happening and the letter A is slightly deformed. Therefore, I keyframe the distortion mesh of layer A and move the letter A a little inside. Of course, it shouldn't move here, so I copy this keyframe and paste it here. At the exact moment when the collision happens, the letter A is deformed. Of course, we can move forward one frame. A pushes H, so I create a keyframe for the position. I will move it a little in the next frame. Now when A pushes on H, H also moves forward. And then it hits O. So I create the position keyframe for layer H. Here it is fixed as soon as it hits. One frame later, it moves forward. Here O pushes to H and returns. Then H pushes on A and A returns to its original place. I select layer A and after a few frames it returns to its original place. Which I can copy and paste from this keyframe. And shape of A also becomes normal that I can copy from this keyframe. Here when A hits H, we can move H a little further. Because H hits O, it should be slightly deformed. After a few frames, it should return to its original place. So that I can copy this keyframe. Here where H hits O, it must be deformed. We can use the mesh warp effect. Place it on the H layer by drag and drop. Keyframe the distortion mesh option. Press U to see the keyframes. This frame is normal. Here, where A hits H, I can deform it a bit. Create a keyframe and deform the letter H like this. Of course, these frames should be normal. I copied these keyframes and pasted here. This action happens soon. I move it one frame. In this way, I change the shape of H to show the collision. I delete this keyframe. Here, when the H hits the O, we must deform it like this. I will move these handles a little and create a shape like this. It hits A again, and finally, its shape becomes normal. When H hits O, it pushes on it, and O moves forward. So I choose layer O. Here I create a keyframe for the position, and when the H hits the O, it moves forward a bit and hits that other O. And then it returns to its original place. If you want to know the exact location of the O, unhide the Yahoo layer and place the O exactly in its place with the arrow keys. I think it's fine now. Now that we have animated these, it is time to deform them. Hide the Yahoo layer. We can create deformation for layer O when it hits H. I use the mesh warp effect. I create the distortion mesh keyframe in this frame. Hit U to see the keyframes. I create another keyframe in the previous frame. Now you can modify its shape frame by frame. Using these handles, I modify the letter O shape. And in this way, let's create a collision mode. I bring this handle to the right. So far we've made it. Now we have to animate the O2 layer. When the exclamation mark hits the letter O, this letter moves and hits this O. So all of these are related and we should animate them together. Select layer O2 and press U to see the keyframes. As soon as the exclamation mark hits the letter O, we must keyframe its position. A few frames later, I move it, like this. After the letter O2 hits O, a few frames later, it hits the exclamation mark again. And finally, it is placed in its original place. Here we can make the distortion mesh normal so that it comes out of the deformed shape. I copy this frame, press Ctrl C, and paste it in the final frame, Ctrl V. We animate it in this way. Here we can move the position a little and hit this O again. And finally, it will be in the original place. I will modify its scale in this frame. I put it on 70 and 70. Here it comes up and this collision happened. It's like this letter O is stuck in the middle of these two, and there is no way to escape. This is O2 pushes O and goes to the left. and O hits H, and finally settles into its place. Now that the general animation is obtained, we must work on the details and correct its distortion. We have almost finished H. Here H again pushes on A. I can move A in the position a bit and bring it to the right. So we are done with H. It's time for this O. I select layer O, and in the distortion mesh part I have to fix its collision with O2. In this frame I select the distortion mesh and deform it in this way. It is better to change the angle of the impact, because the impact is from this side. I will change its angle. This frame becomes normal. Here again, when the letter O2 hits O, a deformation happens. This is how I shape it. And after a few frames, it becomes normal again. Now it's time for O2. I select its distortion mesh. Here where the letter O2 hits O, it should be deformed like this. When it hits the exclamation point, it must be deformed. Again, in this part, it is hitting the letter O in this way, and it should be deformed. Finally, its shape becomes normal, but we animate the scale a little so that we can apply the bounce to it. Move the scale keyframe a little. and here I add 10 to X and subtract 10 from Y. The next frame, its scales become normal, so we can copy this frame. Or I will move this keyframe and place it here, like this. Now I give it the excite effect to create bounce. But its bounce is too much. We can adjust the amount of friction and overshoot from the properties section. In my opinion, it's good. We made this animation so far. This Y should also be given opacity so that it disappears first and appears in one frame. The opacity should be low here. Press Shift T to add opacity. Create a keyframe and set its value to 0. One frame later, I change its value to 100%. So that it appears in one frame. If I play the animation from the beginning, we were able to create such an animation so far. Very beautiful. Well, this was the intro of the logo motion. And in the next session, we want to make the extra of the logo motion, where these letters disappear from the screen. We will add some details to our logo motion in the next session. So stay tuned and see you in the next session.